G'day, welcome to Pay It Forward. Today I'm adding to my Cuddle Doll collection. I promised I would. This is the little donkey in the series and he's absolutely beautiful. My favourite so far. I know I always say that with every latest edition, but this one is really gorgeous and I'm sure so many of you are going to love making him up. If you've made up the other five, you've got to make up little donkey. Lots of options. I've made him up in fabrics. I've added some felt on the front of the nose as the applique, but of course you can make these up entirely in fabric. I promised I would keep it that way. So dive into your stash and see what you've got to make up this beautiful little guy. You can make him up super colourful or in natural tones, whatever you like. So I've got the free pattern ready for you. Now to find that, it is in the description drop down box below. You've got to click on that little grey arrow there and it will show you your pattern link, and you can then print out your free pattern on your own home printer. Follow my printing instructions that I've got there in that drop down box to help you out. You definitely do need to be using A4 paper and use the measuring bar that I have on every page of your templates. I include all of my seam allowances in all of my patterns. Makes it so much easier for you. So let's get busy making number 6 in this series, my beautiful cuddle donkey. So let's start in making our cuddle donkey by having a look at what we're going to need, and we are going to begin with our body pieces. Now I have made this one up in fabrics, as I always do with this cuddle series. I promised I would use fabric rather than felt. But there's lots of options available to you. Now, what I have here is a brushed wool. It's absolutely beautiful. It's smooth on one side, and then the other side is brushed up and it's almost like a fleece, but it's very, very, very flat, so no pile. And it's this lovely chocolate brown with the royal blue through it, which is an unusual combo, but I really love it. So you have your two front body pieces, and both the front and back body pieces are cut the same, except for you've got your markings for your back openings and your tail on the back pieces. Now, before you start cutting out and so on, if you haven't been with me for long, it might be worth you having a look at my cutting and layout video before you even start, because soft sculpture and toy making is completely different to any other sewing. There's certain things we need to do to set ourselves up for success, and cutting and layout is the foundation for your projects. Also, you need to prepare your fabrics. You definitely need a fusible woven cotton interfacing on the backs of all of your body pieces, and it's a fusible one, so it keeps everything flexible but everything strong, and you definitely need to interface this project. So you've got your front and your back pieces cut out, and then we need our little foot pads that go in the bottom. I'm going to pull that bright cobalt blue out of that print, just for a little pop of blue on the bottom of their feet. Now I do use felt for the feet, and I have that same fusible woven interfacing on the back there. Then we move on to the arms. The arms are cut from, what we do is trace our pattern templates for the arms on a doubled piece. You can see I've got right sides together, double piece of our fabric. This is a fabric I'm using for the head and the arms. I tend to colour up the torso and body with something that looks like a little romper. So you can really use your prints and colours here. I'm keeping this all very neutral with this one, with that little pop of blue. This is a beautiful wool fabric, but it's a very lightweight wool. So right sides together, you trace around your shapes, and then I'll show you further into it when we get to there how to do the arms. We don't add interfacing to the arms because we want them to be quite floppy at the top. So that's our arms sorted. Then let's move on to the head. So the head is made from that same beautiful chocolate brown, and of course you can make your donkey any colour. It doesn't have to be natural colours. Certainly they come in all sorts of natural shades, from greys through to taupes and chocolate like I've got here. or you can do a colourful donkey. So we've got our two side head pieces here. Make sure you transfer all of your markings, again with that interfacing applied. We've got our centre head gusset, and it's made up in 3 parts. So we have the back gusset, which is split. We're going to put our yarn in there for our little mane poking out, and we've got our front nose gusset there at the front. Again, all interfaced beautifully. On those pieces and on our side pieces, side head pieces also, we are going to be ironing on. In this case, I am using felt for the accents, just because I like that little bit of volume, but you can certainly use fabric. And we're going to be having that cream fused into place. So these are cut from felt with fusible webbing applied. And we have the same for our face pieces. So they're going to be fused on the end of the muzzle there. And then when we put it all together, we'll have that nice little clean off-white muzzle at the front. All of those have that fusible webbing applied. So that's our head pieces. Move on to our ear pieces. Now, the ear pieces I'm using for the back of the ear, I'm using the same brown fabric. These have fusible webbing applied to the back. And I'm also using a lightweight felt for the inner ear in just a tan shade, just to give some definition to that ear. Also has that fusible webbing applied, because we're going to sew them together, turn them through, and then fuse that ear together so it's one piece. What that does is it gives it some strength, and it makes those little ears stand upright much better, and it's the best way to do it. So we've got our 2 pairs of ears there. We will need a little tail. This is a tail I've made up just from my yarn here. I've taken about 16 strands and divided it into groups of 4 and groups of 6, and then plaited it up. And you can see that's going to go into the seam line, and I'm going to probably add just a little bow on the end, a bit of an Eeyore look there. So I've got my tail all ready. We need eyes, and for the eyes I'm using 10mm. Now, in most cases, you'll be using safety eyes, and you can use anything up to a 12mm safety eye for this project. 10mm I think works best. It gives you a really sweet look, and of course safety eyes come in all sorts of colours. If you are making this project for a child over 3 years of age, you're safe to use an eye like this that we actually sew in, because they're unlikely to chew them and bite them. But under 3 years of age, it's recommended you use safety eyes. I'm assuming because of this series is designed for babies and young ones to cuddle, you'll be using safety eyes. Mine won't be going anywhere. Mine is staying as a sample, so there's no danger there. I've got a couple of buttons pulling that beautiful royal blue again. That's for the front of the body. You don't have to do that. That's just a little extra. I always add a little neck ruffle to this series. I love a neck ruffle. I use it a lot. And it just blends the whole project together. You've also got the option of, I have also with the Cuddle Puppy, there's a little bandana that you can put on, or you might have your own idea for a neck adornment. But they really do look better, this series, with something around their neck, even if that's just a lovely big bow. We will be needing a neck joint, and that is a 45mm neck joint. You'll need some extra, either some fringing to add in between that seam of the head to create the little mane, or some yarn like I'm using here, whatever colour suits your project. You will need your extra strong threads to match, and also some pearl threads. You'll need some dark pearl thread to stitch in the mouth line. We will be filling with polyester filling, and that's about it. So we're going to get started on the body. Now the body I have made before over and over, and I'm going to insert the footage of me making the elephant body. It's exactly the same. You make up the donkey exactly the same way. You insert the tail in the same way, and I will see you back here with my donkey body when we're ready to move forward. Now the body that we're about to make is the body that I use for all of the animal dolls in this series. So even though the colours may change throughout, all of the bodies are put together in the same way. It just saves me having to film that section all over again each time, and it will allow me to give you a whole lot more of a range in this little series. So just follow along regardless of the animal that you're making. This is how you put that body together. The first step in creating the body, we're going to take our two back body pieces, and where the opening marks are, we're going to sew a close zigzag stitch on the machine on the edge there, just to bind those edges. It stops it from fraying, and when we go to close that opening, it's going to be nice and neat and tidy and it won't stretch. So our next step is to create a little tail. Now I've made a plait with my yarn, just a little braid, and left some ends free at the end there. I've just tied a knot in the end and stitched across here. So this is the end we're going to pop into the seam. Mine's about 13 centimeters overall. You can make it longer, shorter, whatever you like. So we're going to be sewing the centre back seams of both the front and the back body pieces. So these are our front body pieces that don't have any marks on them. So the centre front seam are these ones here. So where your mark is at the back, your opening, these are the centre back and centre front seams. So in the front pieces, we just put those right sides together, and we're just going to stitch with a 4mm seam allowance all the way down to the base there. And I do sew that 2 times because we're going to be adding stuffing. Do also make sure that the start and finish of all of your seams, that you back and forth with a couple of stitches to secure it. So when we go to do our centre back seam in exactly the same way, of course we're not going to sew that opening, we're just going to sew from the neck edge down and back and forth, and same here. But here is where our tail is going to go. So we're going to drop that in so that that's caught in between those layers in that seam as we go, and do make sure that you sew back and forth over that section so that it's held well, and make sure that it is all still lined up as you do that. So 4mm seam allowance. I have my jeans needle in my machine, and I do have my machine stitch length set to a number 2, so it's nice and small. You can now go ahead, once you've sewn both those seams, and press them open and flat. It gives you a much better finish in the end. So this is our front and our back. So at this stage, you can go ahead and put those right sides together again. And the seam we're going to sew next is that inner leg seam. It's just a very small little seam, and you want to make sure that you've lined up that center point. So perhaps pop a clip in there or a pin, and we're just going to stitch with that same 4mm seam allowance from the base around. Make sure that you really make sure that that's really nice and secure. So that 2 times that same 4mm seam allowance. There you can see that center inside leg seam stitched, and I've sewn it 2 times. It's nice and strong. And we don't clip that seam. In dressmaking, you would probably clip that seam, but because in soft sculpture, we keep our seams very, very small, and so that we don't have to clip them, because it would definitely compromise that seam. Once we add stuffing, we need it to stay together. So the next thing I've done, before we put this one completely together, I've added my buttons for the front. I've popped my first one about 5 to 6 centimeters from that top neck edge, because remember, we've got pull in around that joint, and you want to leave a little bit of room for a neck ruffle or perhaps a little scarf. So I've got those 2 there. So now we're going to put right sides together, and we're going to sew up those side seams, which of course they will match beautifully. Just popping my clips in there, right the way down the side to the bottom of that leg, and we will sew that 4mm seam allowance 2 times, just the same as before. So the final step in putting the body together is we're going to add the foot pads to the little base of the leg there. So we're going to put right sides together. It's just like pinning in just a teddy bear foot pad. You can start anywhere because it's a circle. So we're just going to take our pin and we're going to go through all of those layers, flip it over and catch a little bit on the other side. Push that pin head all the way down. This is the easiest way to pin in a foot pad. Start to follow that curve. Pin through both of those layers, flip it over and just take a little bit up on the underside. Pushing the pin head down just clamps it all into place. Just going to make my way all the way around. It'll fit in beautifully if you've kept to your 4mm seam allowances. There we go, all pinned into place. My next step will be to take my needle with an extra strong thread on it, and I'm just going to overcast that foot pad into place so that I can remove all of my pins. So I've now removed all of those pins, and you see that little foot pad is tacked into place. I now take some extra strong thread, a single strand with a knot in the end, and we're going to sew that foot pad into place using a stab back stitch. I'm going to put the link at the top of the screen there for you to my video that shows you how to sew this stitch, but I will show you a couple of stitches here. So I'm coming in from the underneath with my needle, and the first thing I'm going to do is just make 2 stitches, one right on top of the other, just so my start point is nice and secure, and nice small stitches. And so now you see how I'm holding that out flat. I'm coming up from behind and just traveling along the length of 1 stitch and going back into my last exit hole. So again, I'm going to come up from the underneath, traveling along a little way and back into the exit hole. Because it's extra strong thread, we're sewing it back and front. It's the strongest stitch of all for hand sewing in soft sculpture. So each time you just have to make sure you go back into that exit hole so that the stitch is fully linked. And you should be able to create a line that's just as accurate as you would on the machine. So you can see I'm just going to make my way right the way around that foot pad, and then I will just repeat with the other side. You can go ahead and turn that one through once you've sewn those foot pads in, and do take your time to roll out all of those seams, particularly around those feet, so we've got a lovely rounded finish. And that's our body. That's the way we put the body together on all of the animals in this series. Regardless of the tail that you pop in there, they're all put together in the same way. So now we're going to move ahead and make the arms. So the arms in this case, that's one that I've already made, and I'm making it in the colour that I'm using for the head. So we've looked like we've got a nice naked little arm, and this is the romper. So very simple to do, just pop that one aside and bring this one in. So I've got my piece of fabric folded right sides together. I've pressed it nice and flat, and I've traced around my template, arm template, and I'm going to stitch exactly on that line all the way around, and I do reinforce the lower edge by sewing that section again. Leave that top edge open, make sure you're back and forth on your start and finish, and then we'll come back to cut that one out. So now that is all stitched, I just need to cut that one out, so straight across the top there, and then I'm going to cut approximately just a 4mm seam allowance, right the way around the edge. And again, we don't notch or trim this seam. We don't clip the curves because we're giving it a very small seam. We're going to be stuffing this, and we don't want to pop that seam open. So before I turn this one through, because I used a heat erasable pen, I can now take that to my iron and press that, and it will remove those marks, and then I'm going to turn that through. I've gone ahead and turned that arm through, and now we're going to add our filling. Now, just like I have with this one, we pack the end of the arm really, really firm up to about the wrist and then soften off. You can see not much there, and then nothing for about the top 1.5 inches, because when we add it, we want the arm to sit nice and soft at the sides. If we fill it right up to the end, it'll stick out. So just go ahead and tuck that filling in that top edge there, in that opening. Easiest with forceps. Take that right down to the base there. Support the end there, but do pack that hand and wrist very firm. Continue up nice and firm, and then soften it off, and then nothing up until here. Once you get up to there, just bring those two edges together and just stay stitch on the machine across the top to hold that all together. Next, we need to go ahead and add those arms to our body at the top of the neck on each side. So you need to first of all make sure that your little hand is curving towards the front, and we're going to take this straight edge here, and we're going to line it up with our center seam, our side seam here, and make sure that it is just exactly halfway. So here's my side seam, and we're just going to tack it to the top. I'm just using my extra strong thread just to hold that into place. Line it up with the top exactly, and it must be right on that seam and centered so that the little arms hang correctly at the side. So these tops of these arms will be pulled in when we put the neck bolt, when we put the head on, and the arms will come out from that neck shoulder section. So it's a great way to add these simple little arms. So I just got that exactly in place. Make sure it's very secure, because the top edge here won't be seen, it'll be drawn in around that bolt. There we go. So as we pull that in around the bolt, that little arm will be caught up in that neck section. So I'm going to do the same. Make sure you line it up on the other side seam exactly in half and stitch the other one into place. My next step is that we sew a doubled strand of extra strong thread, a running stitch just 4 millimeters in from the edge, starting at the back. Leave your tail ends hanging, and sew right around that top neck edge, including those arms. So now I've tied my first knot, and I'm just going to pull on those thread ends and pull that in. So we want to leave just enough room for that bolt to pass through. So just a small opening there. Our disc is 45 millimeters, so it's going to cover all of that, and then knot that off at least 4 times. So here I am back with my little donkey body. You've just seen me put together the elephant body. This was done in exactly the same way, and this has come up absolutely beautiful. So with that all done, we're ready now to go ahead and start making the head. There's a few things we need to do first. We're going to start by creating the ears. I've already put one of them together, and you can see what a beautiful finish that is using that fusible web on the back of those ears. So I'm going to take my 2 ear pieces and remove that backing paper. We're going to sew these together, right sides together, which means we're sewing on the fusible webbing, which is all nicely set. Just a little tip about that. When you go to do this technique, where you do have to sew on the fusible webbing, don't press your fusible webbing on the ear and then immediately try and sew it, because it's still going to be warm. The longer you can leave it, I always prep my fabrics the day before, and then this is really easy to slip under the machine and it will sew. If you sew it while it's still warm, it's going to gum up your needle. So I've got those right sides together. I'm simply going to go ahead and I'm going to sew a really small seam allowance around this ear, nice and small, about 3 millimeters if you can. Make sure you go back and forth on your start and finish right the way around, then we're going to turn it through. So go ahead and turn that ear through and get yourself a knitting needle or something like that and really push those seams out. And then also go ahead and roll out those seams, because you want that beautiful little rounded shape at the top of the ear. So now remember, we've got fusible webbing on both sides of that ear. We're going to take this to the iron and do your pressing on the inner ear part like I have here. And if you take the tip point of your iron straight up the center and follow it around the edge of that seam, you're actually going to fuse everything together, but you're going to get a lovely little ridge around that top piece. You see there? And it really gives it a gorgeous finish. So this is all nicely sealed together. If you iron over the whole edge, it won't give you that nice little ridge, and I think it's really worth doing. So just use the point of your iron and follow that seam line around until you've got that beautifully fused together. So that has that ear fused together into one piece, and now I'm going to fold it in the center, and then we're going to have that beautiful little ear shape. And all I need to do is just pinch that edge together, make sure it's beautifully lined up. And just as I have here with this one, I've just overcast stitch that edge together. So that's going to be ready to pop into the seam of the head. So now we can pop those 2 ears aside and we'll continue with the rest of the head. Our next step is to get our side head pieces and our front muzzle piece. And you can see I've already done this one. I've just removed the backing paper. This has the fusible web on it, and we are going to line that up with the front. You can see that it will fit absolutely perfectly. Make sure it is beautifully lined up, and same with the front muzzle piece right to the edge. And you can just press those into place with a hot iron and a protective cloth. Once you have all of those pieces in place, we need to sew those edges in some ways. A couple of ways that you can do it. I'm going to use my 8-ply pearl thread in a single strand, and I'm going to sew a blanket applique stitch on that edge there. I don't mind doing that bit of hand stitching. If you like, you can take this to the machine and you can sew a close satin stitch on the machine, a zigzag stitch where it's very close together, and that will settle it nicely too. Use a thread that works for your project. I want a nice clean line, so I'm going with the cream, and it's just this edge here because the other edges are caught up in seams. So I come in from behind. I've just got a knot in the end of my thread. I'm just going to make my first stitch. So a blanket applique stitch, we take our needle in, we go through all the layers, and we come out on the edge of our shape, and I'm taking up some of that fabric on the underside, and I bring my needle out through my thread loop. I will put a link at the top of your screen here for my video on how to sew this stitch. I'm going to keep this nice and small But it is a lovely decorative stitch, and it's nice to add some hand stitching on these little heirloom dolls. So again, just travel the length of one stitch. I'm making sure that I'm keeping those stitches nice and even. And also make sure whenever you're doing a blanket applique stitch that you're rotating your work as you go so that all of your stitches radiate straight out. So you can see there, that's going to give me a lovely little binding finish on that edge. So I'm going to do this one, and just across the top of the nose section. So with all of that stitching done there now, I can put those aside as well, because now we have to prepare the centre back head gusset. And in this seam here, we're going to be adding the yarn, or you may have purchased just some fringing that you can put in between that seam. I've just taken my yarn, my black yarn, and I have wrapped it around just a container here. I'm just going to pull that out. It doesn't matter what you wrap it around, just to give yourself some lengths. Put my finger in there. I'm just going to grab my large scissors. And I'm just going to snip through. I just want to create lengths of yarn. So that's given me quite a few lengths to play with. Snip that one there. And you'll notice that on your pattern pieces, you've got a mark there. So this is the front of the head where this nose is going to be attached. So what we're going to do on the right side of one of the pieces, so we're going to put this one away. So on the right side, we are going to start just a little way from the edge. Don't start right on the edge. So come back about 1 centimetre, and I'm just going to take my yarn pieces and I'm going to start sewing them in right close to the edge here, all the way down until I get to that mark. And I'm going to make mine quite full. You could do it in a single layer, and it depends on how thick, what the ply of your wool is. Mine's quite fine, so I can really pack it in there. So I will tuck this under the machine, and just as I go along, I just keep adding a few more until I've got it all stitched into place. But make sure it's within that seam allowance of what is about 4 to 5 millimetres. So stay at about 3 millimetres from the edge, stitching it in. Then we can trim this afterwards. But let me just go ahead, get those in place, and then I can show you how that looks. So let me show you up close how that should look. So you can see I've stitched, that's about 2 millimetres in from the edge. I've sewn over that a couple of times, and it's over that piece there. So now I'm just going to trim away, easier to see from this side. I'm going to trim away my excess, but I do want some still remaining to tuck into that seam. We can always trim it up later, and it's a bit easier to see putting your other pattern piece together. So now we're going to put our right sides together, and we are going to sew that centre seam, and I will overcast it first. So I will sew that with a tacking stitch first, and then you're going to sew that seam, which is from the edge. It is a 4 millimetre seam allowance. So you'll find that this will be all incorporated in it. It's much easier if you overcast it first. I overcast every seam I sew anyway. It stops everything from slipping, and it's important that all of this matches up when we go to assemble the rest of the head. So make sure you back and forth on your start and finish, top and bottom, and get that stitched 2 times into place with that 4 millimetre seam allowance. You should now have that centre gusset piece with your little mane popping out through there. So you can see, come from the other side. I leave about that much, I don't trim it shorter than that. I also open up my overcasting stitch so that I can make that seam at the front open and flat, and at the back everything will sit better if you do that. So that will be the top of the head. I've also trimmed mine back to about 3 centimeters. I may even trim it shorter. Don't leave it long like a horse's mane. It won't give you that donkey look. It actually needs to be quite short. I might even trim it a bit more once the head is all put together. So now we're going to take this piece that is all put together, open out that seam so it's nice and flat. I'm going to take my assembled front nose gusset and I'm going to match up that centre seam with the centre mark that I have there, and I will pop a pin through there. I'm then going to overcast this in place, making sure this is perfectly centred. You should have just a tiny bit of a point extending either side. That's for your seam allowance. Then we're going to sew that seam 2 times, that 4mm seam allowance. That's how that should look, all assembled. So we've got all our head pieces ready to go now. We can actually put this head together. So we're going to put that one aside and we're going to take our 2 side head pieces. We're going to put right sides together, and the seam we're going to be sewing is the centre front seam. Now here's where your cutting and layout precision is going to pay off, because this coloured piece here, they should meet up beautifully. If you've taken the time to trace around your shapes and put that together well with your cutting and layout, you won't have any problems. So the seam we're going to sew is, first I'm going to overcast it as I always do, and then I will sew this on the machine 2 times from the nose down to the neck edge, back and forth on your start and finish, and sew that seam 2 times. You can go ahead and turn that seam through, and as we did before, you want to make sure you really roll it out. So you've got that perfect curve, front curve. This front curve looks quite accentuated. We have that there because we're going to pull in that mouth. So always check it, push it back through, and now we're going to sew in the centre head gusset. We're going to start with the nose section. I've taken out my overcasting stitch, again, so that I can open that seam nice and flat, and it gives you a better curve. So now we're going to take our front head gusset. I'm going to take my pin through my centre mark at the seam allowance of 4mm, and I'm going to take it through the centre front seam. Straight through, make sure it's dead centre. Push that pin all the way. And then we're going to start to line up those top edges. So pin all the way through, flip it over, take up just a little bit on the other side of the fabric and push the pin head all the way down. That clamps that into place. Do the same on the opposite side, but make sure again you've got that centered at the front. So pin all the way through all the layers, flip it over, take up just a little bit on the other side, pin head all the way down. So now we're starting to pull this into shape. Now what we're aiming to do is match up these 2 pieces here. Get it as close as you can. This is why keeping to your seam allowances is super important. So I'm actually going to pin it right there and then just adjust the rest to suit, so that when we turn that head through, the little nose section is all meeting up. So I'm going to do the same on the other side. I'm going to meet it up here. And pin that into place. Then I'll adjust it if I need to, just to ease the rest of that in. And when I did sew this chin seam, you can see that I did change my thread colours. So I did my dark brown here and then changed my thread colour in the machine to the cream. So you can see that's fitting in beautifully. I haven't had to do any easing there at all. So when I say it all starts from your cutting out, getting to this point, it's very, very true. So now we're just going to continue on. Pinning into place until we get to our marks on our head gusset there. And then I'm just going to go ahead and overcast just that section into place. Always, always overcast it into place. I have that nicely overcast into place from those 2 marks all the way around, and those marks correspond with marks on the other side of your headpiece. Now I've got a single strand of extra strong thread, and I'm going to be sewing just from where the colour starts. So where I've added that piece, which in my case is an off-white, the felt, this is where I'm going to start my stitching. And that's because I can use my cream thread and sew that section in, and then when I go to sew the head seam, I can put it under the machine and sew it all in the main body colour of the dark brown. So we're going to sew this with a stab back stitch. Let me bring that up a little bit closer for you all. So there we go. So you can see now again, I'm going to put a link at the top of the page for you, top of the screen, so you can see my video on the stab back stitch. You do need to hand sew this section in. There's no other way to do it, and you need it to be very accurate. So I've started by coming up from the underneath in my seam allowance of 4mm. And I'm going to sew initially just 2 stitches right on top of each other, and I'm pulling them in nice and tight, and particularly for me, I'm using 2 thick fabrics, so I do need to pull those stitches nice and firm. Now I'm going to travel along on the underneath the length of 1 stitch. I'm going to keep my stitches nice and small, staying at in that 4mm seam allowance. So I've come up from the underneath, and now I'm going to go back into the last exit hole that I came out of, and then I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to travel along again. I'm making sure that I'm following this lovely curve. You don't want to cut any corners because I've drawn all these lovely curves, design curves in for a reason, and you want to go with those. Back in every time, back into the last exit hole. So you travel along the length of 1 stitch from the underneath, keeping those stitches nice and small. Take your time with this, it's the most important part of your project, and back in, and you should be able to create a line of stitching that is very, very accurate, very straight, and it's all linked back and front, top and bottom, so you only need to sew that 1 time. I'm going to continue on right the way around to the other side. I'll finish off with 2 stitches on top of each other, and either side of this centre junction here I will also do 2 stitches to really anchor that centre point in. You always want to turn your nose section through and roll those seams out really well, again, to check that you've got that right and that everything's nice and straight and lined up as I said. So now we're going to pop that back through, and we're going to add the ears. So we're going to pop the ears in place. It's easier to do them now than before because otherwise we had too much to deal with. So I'm simply going to just stitch into place each ear. You've got a mark on your side headpiece. Your ear goes in, lines up here. This is the start of the ear, and the ear opening is facing forward towards the nose. And you just simply want to tack that into place with your extra strong thread because it's going to be incorporated within the seam. Just make it sure it's just within the seam allowance. and just have it follow that curve of the top of the head. And again, this is why if you want me to do ears that are built in for you, which I've done with this pattern, it's a whole lot easier than sewing ears on, upright ears like this, sewing them on. Very, very tricky. So if you want them sewn in like this, it's super important that you follow all of your seam allowances so that when you follow these marks that I've given you, the ears are going to be in the same place and even. If you've taken a deeper seam allowance on one side than the other, the ears may not sit where they should be. We can check that when we're putting those side head pieces together. We can check that they're lined up as well. So I'm going to do the same with this one. Facing forwards. Just tuck that into place also. Now we have both of those ears in place. We can go ahead, tuck them in as we go, and we're going to pin the rest of that side head in. I'm working on the head gusset. Don't do this from the other side panels there. Do all your work on this center head gusset. Make sure those ears are tucked in nicely and that they will be nicely incorporated into that seam. And you'll just pin that all the way down to the neck edge. Make sure that all meets up down the bottom, and then overcast that one into place. And then, as I said before, you can sew this section on the machine. You need to sew it 2 times, 4mm seam allowance. You want to go over that ear section a couple of times, and also make sure that you do link your stitching up with that section that you've hand stitched in. And then repeat on the opposite side, still working on the head gusset. You can go ahead and turn that one through once you've sewn up those side head seams. This is always an exciting one to turn through because everything's there for you. It suddenly turns into a donkey. It's so very cute. So now we're going to fill this head. Now, if you're going to be adding safety eyes, I feel like the majority of you will be adding safety eyes. You need to temporarily stuff the head to get your eye placement correct. Please don't skip this step. I'm going to say that again. If you're using safety eyes, you need to stuff the head. You just softly fill the head, make sure you've pushed everything out, and you make your marks for the eyes. Then pull that stuffing out. Add the eyes. You're going to crunch those backing washers onto them and have them in place. Then you're going to go ahead and stuff the head properly. You cannot guess this. There's no way you'll get it even, and you'll be very disappointed if you put all this work into your project and then the eyes aren't right. And with safety eyes, once you've put them in, that's it. They're not coming out. That's the whole purpose of them. So I'm not using safety eyes, I'm using my glass eyes, which are put in after the head is stuffed. You can also use little shank buttons for eyes in the method that I'll show you how to put the eyes in, and they're added afterwards. But like I said, not for children under 3 years of age. So if you are using safety eyes, continue to watch this video until I've got this head stuffed and the eye placement done, so you can see where to put them. So now I'm going to fill this head super, super firm. You really want to make sure this front section is filled out because we're going to pull in that mouth line, and we need it to be firm to do that, otherwise it's just going to collapse on itself. And as I said, I've put in all these lovely curves for you to fill out with your stuffing, super, super firm. And if you make sure that you pack in around those ears well, they're going to stand up nicely. So I'm going to fill that using my forceps and my polyester filling, and I will be using my wool felting needle to pack it all in nice and firm. I'm going to stop about 1.5 centimeters from the edge. I'll come back and show you that when it's done. So this has my donkey's head all filled out, and to give you an indication, you can see I've got little or no give in that at all. Super, super firm all over the head. I've gone in there with my felting needle and packed all of that fibre in. So I've got a nice flat surface for my neck bolt to go into. But first I take a doubled strand of extra strong thread on my needle and I sew a running stitch starting at the back, just 5 millimeters in from the neck edge all the way around. I leave my tail ends hanging so that we can tie it off. So, and I come back and finish off where I started. I'm going to take that neck bolt and slip that in. And then I can take those thread ends. I've already got my first knot tied. And I can pull that in nice and tight around the bolt. You want to get in a comfortable position to be able to do this. Hold that tension up, knot that off at least 4 times. I leave my needle on because then I go around it again and do the same thing just to make sure it's really, really secure. So now that we've got that head neck bolt all tied off, we're ready to do our eye placement. If you're doing your safety eyes, this is where I'm going to show you where they go. So you can see on the head that you've got an area that comes in and then starts to fan out onto the forehead. The sweet spot for the eyes is right in that divot there, just a little way from your seam line. I'm using eye tester pins and I've put those in. Now when I add my eyes, because I'm tying them in, I'm going to be able to pull them in a little bit. You see that those eyes will sink in just a little bit. If you're using safety eyes, you don't get any pull in. That's why I like these eyes. So you may need to make them a little closer together to get more of that look pulled in. You don't want them sitting up here. You don't want them down here across the bridge of the nose. Right there you can see when you add them, you can see that's the sweet spot. So once you've chosen that eye placement, you can then go ahead and make a hole, a mark and a hole if you like, with your awl, both sides. And as I said, you can do this with a little shank button as well. Just make sure that this hole here is big enough to accommodate the shank. And then I'm going to add my little 10 millimeter eyes. But what I have done first is I've cut just a slightly larger circle of my cream felt to sit behind that eye because I'm putting a dark brown eye on dark brown and I don't want it to get lost. So I've just made a little hole in that felt and slipped the shank through it. I hope you can see that. But I've done it in a way that it's not central, that most of that felt is showing on the underside of the eye. So we're going to get that little, you know, that little cute little look with the whites of the eyes showing. It's going to make all the difference. So to add eyes this way, you actually take a doubled strand of extra strong thread, nice and long, and then you fold it again in the middle. So I've got 2 loops here and it's 4 threads folded over. I now have to take that eye with that felt on the back. Of course, you don't have to add the felt on the back. Makes it very tricky to get those loops. You need to pass all of those loops through the shank of that eye. Once you have that loop through the shank, you open out that loop and then take all of your thread ends back through it, and that becomes the knot that holds the eye. So now you've got the eye on the end of 4 strands of your extra strong thread. We then thread that up onto our long dowel needle, which I've already done with the opposite eye. And I'm going to take that dowel needle straight into that hole, making sure I'm not catching any fabric there. I'm going straight into the stuffing. I'm going to take that out down the center at the back and pull that eye all the way through. Because I've got that little white of the eye, I need to make sure that I've got that adjusted, that it's going to be sitting forward like that. So I'm going to have that little cutesy little look. You can see as I pull that in, that's going to look lovely. What I do like to do also is with this group of 4 threads, I tie a knot in the end because I'm going to take the other eye thread through, and I want to be able to tell which is which. Now I'm going to take my awl and just enlarge that exit hole a little bit, because now I have to rethread the other eye onto the doll needle. I'm going to take that same eye straight through, and I'm going to bring my needle out through the same hole. It's easier to do than you might think, and you do have to make sure that you're not catching any fabric as you do that. You should be coming out straight through the hole, because we're going to tie these eyes off into the stuffing, not the surface of the fabric. So I'm going to get the second one in there. So now I've got both the eyes taken through to the back. They're both coming out of that same exit hole. Haven't caught any fabric. I've tied my first knot, and now it's just a matter of tightening them up. Tightening that knot and pulling them in. And I'll use my thumbs to press them in and position them, checking that I've got those little felt pieces in the right position. Press them in, pull on those thread ends, tighten that knot. I will over sync them. I'll make them tighter than I want them, because they'll always slacken off a little, and then knot that off at least 4 times. When you cut your thread, when you snip your thread ends, they will disappear into the stuffing in the head, because you haven't caught any of that surface fabric. I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to get those pulled in and tied off. It's not something I can do on camera. So now we have those eyes in place, we're going to put in our mouth line. Now I've added my pins, so you can see it's just over 1 centimetre from the edge here. And we're going to put in a smile that pulls in that front section there. We don't put it underneath here, because that would be weird. It's going across, and it's actually going to pull that pointed area in and create a mouth line. To do that, well, first of all, I've got my pins in place. Pins are best because you can get a clear idea. Look at it from every angle and make sure you've got that right. And then take a doubled strand. I am using 5-ply pearl thread in a black, a doubled strand. I've taken the 2 ends through my needle, because if I make a mistake, I can then get out of it, pull my thread out, and not have to start all over from the beginning. So I put a knot in the end. Where we're going to start is the underneath here, and we're going to first just secure the thread with 1 stitch, so it's really anchored in, because we're really going to put some pressure on this. Then I'm going to go in. If you can from here, you can go straight across and bring your needle out at one of your points. It's got to be right there where you've got that pin. Pull that one out. Pull those threads through. And that's really going to hold at the base there, because now we're going to pull it across, making sure that we don't have the threads twisted, and we're really going to put some pressure on to really pull in that mouth line. I'm then going to take my needle in this side, and I'm going to come out at the bottom of the head again, and I'm going to be keeping up that pressure and cast off with those couple of 2 stitches to make a knot at the base, so it's pulled in evenly on both sides. And there we have that little smile pulled into place. You can see that pull in at the front there, and it just is all you need, and that 5-ply pearl makes all the difference. So it's nicely anchored at the base here, so that it's never coming away. So I don't add anything else to this head. I do not add nostrils, because I've designed it to pull in the right places to give you that donkey look. And I do advise you, I strongly recommend that you keep these designs really simple, because heirloom dolls are supposed to be very, very simple in design. And the proof of it, children much prefer a simple design. The proof of it is that I constantly have my grandchildren come in here, my very young grandchildren, and they have everything available to them. They've got, you know, the Cheshire Cat and poodles and Pinocchio. And I say, which is your favourite thing here? And 9 times out of 10, they will say, I like the frog. And I go, really? But yeah, they do. So if you're making for children, you've got to think, you know, childlike and what they like. They like simplicity. So if you're making for collectors, of course, masterclass is your go. But keep it simple, don't over detail it, you'll lose the innocence of the whole piece. So I think that's absolutely all he needs. You can see those little ears sit up beautifully. You can pull them over to the side more if you want. You can trim that mane up if you like. I actually like it quite long on mine, so I'm going to leave it there. Mine's about, I'd say, 3 centimetres long. So now we're going to take our head and we're going to add it to our body. So I'm going to take that bolt straight through that neck hole that we've made, and I'm going to get in there and add the corresponding disc. Tuck that in there. And then the washer, and then the bolt. Just going to finger tighten for now. Just finger tighten, because you need to make sure that you don't have anything trapped and that the little arms are coming out nice and evenly from that neck. Tighten that up a little bit more. Pulling everything out, making sure your centre seam is right. Making sure everything's pulled out at the front and those little arms are sitting nice and even either side. Once you've got that right, you can go ahead and tighten that up with your spanner, which I will do. I like there to be a little bit of posability, but all of those layers do need to be clamped well together. Once you've done that, you can go in there and you've got that tightened how you like it. I've got my super glue here, and I'll add 1 drop of super glue into the threads of that bolt so that will never come adrift. And there we go, little donkey all put together, ready to be filled up. So we can go right ahead and do that with our polyester filling. I will use my long forceps, that will help me get down into the leg area. You do want to make sure you really fill out this area. Let me show you on my hippo. You really want to pack out this area here, avoid any creasing through this area. And the body should have some give in it, but it should still hold its shape beautifully. Fill it right up to the back edge, and then use your felting needle as you go to be tucking in those fibres, and then we're going to come back and close that opening. So I have that body all filled out beautifully there. You can see nice and firm. We haven't got any pleats or tucking anywhere, and that little bottom filled out as well. So I have taken my needle felting, my wool felting needle, and tucked in all of those fibres. And now I'm going to sew that opening closed. Let me just bring that up a little closer for you all. So there we go. So to do that, you need a single strand of extra strong thread. I've got a whole pile of knots on the end of that. And I do have a video that shows you how to sew this stitch. It's a bit hard to see here because I have to use the same colour thread, and in my video I show you with a different coloured thread. I'll put the link at the top of the screen there for you. But I'll give you the basic idea. We start by coming in on the underneath of the seam at our seam allowance of 4 millimeters, right where that seam starts to open out, and pull that all the way through. Then we're going to travel straight across. I'm going to spin him around. Going to travel straight across and dive in the opposite side in the seam allowance and just travel down the length of one stitch. So you want to keep your stitches fairly small and pull that through. Give that a little squeeze. Then we come back across to where we started. We're actually going to go into that same hole that we started from, and we're going to do the same thing and just travel down just the length of one stitch. I usually do this on my lap, so I'm making this look very awkward, and Donkey isn't helping me at all with his big nose. Right, so I pull that one in and I give it a little squeeze, and it's starting to pull in that seam. I go across to the other side again, back into the last exit hole, and then travel down again the length of one stitch. You want to keep your stitches even either side so that you're traveling down at the same in the same way. Otherwise you'll end up, you taking bigger stitches on one side, you'll end up with puckering on the other side. So giving that a squeeze each time I do a stitch, I give that seam a squeeze and pull it in. And I'm just going to make my way down, all the way down until that opening is closed. Cast off just somewhere on the seam line there. Don't be sewing it down, get halfway and then think, oh, I better give it a squeeze and pull my stitches up, because it'll never knit in tight. Do have a look at that video, that will help you out. And if you want to change to a curved needle, that can certainly help you with tucking in those stitches and bringing them out. So let's get that closed up. And there we have our completed beautiful little cuddle donkey, and I think you'll agree he's a great addition to the series. Love his amazing faux hawk there. As I said, you can trim that shorter if you like, but you know, I like wild hair, so there you go, that cute little smile on the side. I'm very excited to see what you're going to do with this one. I do love just the brown tones. I've added a little neck ruffle. I'll put the link at the top of the screen there for you to find that neck ruffle measurement. It's very simple to make. It's with my bunny video, but the link is there if you want to check that out. Also, if you want to make a little bandana instead, you can go ahead and have a look at the Cuddle Pup. The Cuddle Puppy has the bandana pattern there as well. You can put anything you like on this one. You could even put little hand knitted cardigans on them. Great series, and this one is my favourite, but the latest one I've made always is I've added a little bow to the back of his tail. I need to find a royal blue one. I'll definitely do that. Super cute. Thank you for joining me, and I'm excited to see yours. Okay, so this is the whole crew. It's a bit of a squeeze. Lucky they're cuddle dolls. They are all there, trust me. Little puppy is getting a bit squashed there. So this is probably the last time I can hold them all, but it's not going to stop me adding to this series. Definitely have lots more in mind. So if you have made all of them in this series so far, come and join our Facebook page and post the group of 5, or even better, make up the little donkey, the new donkey, and post your little group of 6, because I love to share your creations on my Instagram story. So I'm always looking for great pics, whether it is pay it forward projects or masterclass, and I love to show your work off to the world. So I have just released Crazy Cat Lady. Most of you have seen her. If you want to step up and try some masterclass creations, the link is down below for you to come and join. It is an advanced class, but there's some incredible talent coming out of there. Thank you so much everybody who has joined me in masterclass, and of course for all of you who follow me on Pay It Forward. Your work is as beautiful. You must understand that I'm all about just a beautifully created project, and I really think that the tiniest little snail and the most beautifully made little pincushion is equally as impressive to me as any masterclass project. So I appreciate seeing all of them. Thank you all for sharing them. So in the meantime, if you do want to chat to me one-on-one, follow me on Instagram. That address is across your screen there. You can chat to me about anything there privately, or show me your work, something you want to show me privately. Go right ahead and chat to me there. So I'm working on a new series and I'm a bit excited about it, and I wish I could tell you about it. And it's for Pay It Forward, but I'll keep it under my hat for now. But it's going to be something really new and different as well. So looking forward to that. So everybody have a fantastic creative week. Keep working on those. I'm looking forward to seeing those beautiful crazy cat ladies, or crazy cat men. There might be some of those there, some crazy Ginger Toms perhaps. So it's all very exciting. Thank you all for joining me. Thank you so much everyone for your support. And remember, most of all, to pay all those good things forward. Share Pay It Forward across your other sewing platforms. And until next time, it is hooroo from me.